before COVID-19, the situation for environmental migrants in the Sahel was not easy either. Migrants were gaining most of their livelihood sources through work in their areas of origin, but already back then they were supplementing these livelihoods with seasonal migration and secondary sources of livelihoods. There have been really two main changes in relation to COVID-19 in the Sahel on environmental migrants. The first has been obviously the restriction of movements, and particularly cross-border movements, meaning that crossing land borders until now is not allowed. And then second is that trade and also movement within a country has been affected negatively. And so when we look at these two impacts, who has been the most affected has really been the people who rely on movement for accessing their livelihoods. Mostly environmental migrants engaged in cross-border migration, but then also those who actually usually do rely on migration to access livelihoods, but decided to not migrate because of these restrictions. Those who we call involuntarily immobile, who decided to stay, but as a result actually didn't have enough livelihoods to provide for themselves and their families. When we look at the consequences for these people, what we have to understand is that already before their situation was very, very sensitive. This means that when we look at the impact, what we have found in our study is that in the immediate term, people still manage to cope by borrowing money, by lending or trying to find food through other means. However, of course, these are coping mechanisms which worked in the short term, but if we then look at the longer term, these are likely to negatively impact these populations. So what we are likely to see in terms of consequences is really that in the longer term, these people will have more problems to cope with their current situation, which is already very fragile, and they'll just be more and more vulnerable to shocks, and actually the inability to respond to these shocks and provide for their basic needs.